I could not believe what I was seeing. I could have filled the back of his head with 5.56, which is an absolute joke.
Well, it's not an ape, because if the Sasquatch was an ape, we would already have one.
What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. We have Kevin joining us today. Kevin, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you today, Will?
I'm good. So, tell us about what you found and experienced. Just kind of, take us from the beginning and walk us into that situation.
Okay. Well, me and my wife went camping in the Southern Sierras, which would be the eastern side. So you access it from the 395 highway. We just took off because we wanted to get out for the weekend, and there's an area I'd been looking at on some maps for a while, so we decided to go check it out. I don't know if I exactly want to give away the location. I'll just say that it's Southern Sierras on the east side above Kennedy Meadows. So we went up there, got there on a Friday afternoon, and this area, it opens up into a big meadow. It's probably over a mile wide and probably 2 to 3 miles long going north to south. This particular meadow has a south fork of the Kern River flowing through it. And to even access this meadow, you have to, it's about 10 miles on a 4x4 Jeep trail. Surprisingly, though, it gets a lot of traffic and has a lot of campers on it. So again, Friday night, we got up there, went to the end of the Jeep Road, and this Jeep Road ends and it butts up against the Golden Trout Wilderness. That's where it dead ends. And we were going to set up camp right next to the stream. It was beautiful, but we were getting eaten by mosquitoes pretty bad, so we decided to move away and camped Friday night, probably, about a mile or so from the end of the Jeep Road. Other than mosquitoes, it was a great evening. You could hear, like birds and stuff and squirrels running around and chipmunks and doing their thing. So we stayed that night, though. We retired early to the tent. It was a completely uneventful evening. Woke up the next morning, but we decided to take off because of the mosquitoes. And we drove down off the mountain and camped in the high desert down near the Lone Pine area. But we didn't want to go home and end the weekend so early, so we decided to try to go back up the mountain on Sunday and try to find another camp spot farther away from that south fork of the Kern River and maybe avoid the mosquitoes and maybe there'd be less people. So we drove back up and we stopped on the edge of the meadow on Saturday what would be Sunday now. So most of the campers that were back there that we saw, they had all left. I think we saw 2 other vehicles the whole time we were up there. But again, like I said, we stopped on the edge of the meadow instead of driving into the meadow to the back where the road ends. This time we're probably somewhere between 100 and 200 yards from the Kern River, just inside the tree line of where the road drops into the meadow. And it's a little bit elevated right before it drops in, so we had a good view of the meadow and decided to set up camp there for the evening. It was beautiful, probably around 73 degrees in the afternoon, a slight breeze, which helped with the mosquitoes. You could still hear birds chirping and stuff. Nobody around. It just had a calmer feel to it. It was perfect. So we do our thing that evening. Make dinner, sitting around, just enjoying our evening. And right before we decided to go to bed, we heard what we thought were coyotes off in the distance doing their usual chirping, yelping and barking like they do. But there were some howls mixed in, and I didn't say anything out loud, but I noticed that they sounded different to me. The tone was different. It didn't sound like the coyotes that we have here near our suburban home in Southern California, because we live in a greenbelt where we live, or near a greenbelt. But my wife was the one that actually said, those coyotes sound different. They don't sound like the ones by home. And the tone was off. So to explain that, I don't know if like coyotes, at least in our suburban area, they have a really high-pitched kind of yap and yip and bark. And even when they kind of mix a howl in, even though they don't really howl around here, it just has that really high-pitched sound to it where it almost kind of hurts your ears sometimes. And the tone, what we heard up there was completely different. So I don't know if that means anything, but it just didn't sound like a normal coyote to us. And again, my wife had picked that out. So we forgot about that, though, went about our evening, and we finally ended up going to bed. And sometime between midnight and early morning hours, I don't know what time it was exactly, because when these next events I talk about happened, I didn't look at the phone to see what time it was. My wife was snoring a little bit, so it rustled me a little bit, and I kind of woke up. And I was just laying there trying to fall back asleep, and I thought I might have heard some movement, like, outside the tent. And keep in mind, though, we don't have a normal ground tent. We have one of those rooftop tents, one of those fold-open tents that people put on top of their SUVs, or like you have a pickup on a bed rack. I have a pickup with a bed rack, and the tent's mounted on top, and when we're laying down, our heads are about 6 feet off the ground. So, so I'm laying there and thought I heard some movement, and trying to fall back asleep, so I couldn't be sure if I heard some movement because my wife was snoring a little bit. But then a few minutes go by, and I heard what I thought was like something taking big breaths in and out through its nose like a dog does when it's trying to sniff something. So like, when a dog's really trying to get the scent of something, it'll take several breaths in and out through its nose. I heard about 4 breaths like that, and it sounded like it was head high right outside the tent. I didn't move. My heart rate jumped up and got going a little bit. I'm just kind of laying there trying to figure out what it is. Keep in mind, first thought was a bear. Like, the whole Sasquatch, Bigfoot thing didn't even enter my mind at that point. Even though we're Southern Sierras, there's not a lot of, black bear in that area, but all the developed campgrounds have bear boxes, so it is area the bear can be in. So I thought, okay, maybe it's a bear sniffing around doing its thing. Just laid there for a while, kind of running through my head, thinking it was a bear, and just kind of listening to see if he was going to keep harassing camp or go away. I didn't hear any other noise other than those 4 breaths in and out. I finally fall back asleep. We get up the next morning, and I didn't tell my wife the next morning when I woke up about what I had heard, because I didn't want to alarm her too much. I didn't know how she would react to that. But the next morning, she had gone to use the restroom, and probably about 40 yards away from my truck, still just barely inside the tree line, we had one of those little like portable shelters, made out of the same material as a tent that you can use and put like the little porta potty and stuff in it. And she had gone to use the restroom. But when she came back, she noticed, she's like, hey, there's like some, the way she explained it, some poop over here from an animal. And I don't know what it is. And it wasn't there yesterday. So I walked over with her and I looked at it. And I'm bummed out that I didn't take a picture of it. Still, I was going to take a picture of it, but her comment was like, ooh, gross, why are you going to take a picture of poop? So I ended up not doing it. But the best way I can describe it, if you can imagine, is taking like a big pot of oatmeal and just dump it upside down on the ground. And if you imagine 2 circles and you draw 2 circles on a piece of paper and they overlap just slightly, that's how these 2 look like 2 different, the best way I could describe it is different bowel movements, I guess, because they were kind of overlapped on top of each other and they didn't mix together. And they were 2 different colors. One was like a lighter color, and it looked like it, for lack of a better description, like it had pieces of sausage in it. And the other one had a reddish color that looked like it might have had vegetation or berries in it. And they weren't mixed. But they were still soft, because when my wife poked them with a stick, they were still soft. And she said they weren't there yesterday. I wasn't in that little area yesterday where she said she was, and they weren't there. So we're like, okay, well, to us, I'm like, okay, this is probably a bear. But it was like a lot. It seemed a little bit a lot to me for a bear because these circles were about probably 10, 12 inches in diameter, and then they were about 3 or 4 inches high. So we're like, well, let's see if we can find bear tracks. We kind of worked the area out in about a 360 circle from that area out to about 50 yards. And we found 0 bear tracks, which seemed odd to us, or at least me. But again, in the defense of that, this is a heavily trafficked area where people camp a lot. They haven't had a lot of rain because we're going into the summer months, and the ground's hard. There is parts in it that are covered with like vegetation. So, and also there's a lot of human footprints, like hiking boots and things like that, that disturb the ground. So we didn't find any bear prints. It just seemed odd to us. So we didn't think anything of that. We kind of dismissed it. And then before we left that day, my wife's a photographer, and I'm kind of getting into it with her. And we decided to walk down into the meadow near the river where the Kern River goes through and get some landscape shots because this meadow has high peaks all around it. Some of them still had a tiny, tiny little bit of snow and some patches here and there. So we wanted to try to get some good photos before we left. And we're walking along the water's edge. And keep in mind, let me try to describe the soil. So it's kind of sandy. Certain parts of it are gravelly, and then it kind of has some mud. And there's about on both sides of the river near our camp, where the road crosses it. It's probably got about anywhere from 5 to 8 foot, like strips of bare soil that run kind of away from the road, where you can walk down next to the water. But eventually, probably down about 20 to 30 feet either direction on the road, the vegetation comes back in where it's right up to the water's edge. Well, we had walked south along the river away from the road where it crosses it, and we're just looking around. My wife's looking down to see if she sees any bear prints near the water, and we're taking photos and things. And right where the strip of soil just starts to narrow, right before the vegetation starts again, my wife noticed some footprints, and I see her looking down, and I come over and I look at them, and I didn't say anything yet, but right away they didn't look human to me. The photos that I sent you guys, they're very wide, all the way from the forefoot where the toes start all the way back to the heel. Even though there is somewhat of a V shape towards the heel, they're very wide. They didn't appear to have an arch to me. There was actually some other human barefoot prints that were readily distinguishable that had, the typical very narrow heel, and you could see the curvature in near the center of the footprint, where the arch would be. And it kind of had, all the rest of the footprints had that typical kind of almost hourglass shape where you have the wide forefoot, it gets narrow where the arch is, and then it widens out a little bit where the heel is. But none of them were as wide as these prints. So my wife knows that I've been listening to your guys' podcast, and she started teasing me right away about, are these Bigfoot prints? And I didn't say anything for a minute. And I said, and I sort of in a serious tone kind of said, well, they might be. I don't know. So we took pictures of them, and, she kind of teased me for the, rest of the ride home about that and everything. And so we get home, and we're talking about it some more, and I told her, I was talking about the podcast. She knows I've been listening to you guys, and that's when I decided to send you an email and send you those pictures, because I wasn't, in my mind, I wasn't like, oh, these are Sasquatch or Bigfoot prints. In my mind, I was like, okay, maybe these are. And something else that kind of led me to just be really skeptical about it is they aren't large. They're about 10 inches long, somewhere between 10 and 11 inches. When I put my size 10 hiking boot kind of next to it, it was about as long as my size 10 hiking boot. But some other things that were odd is the soil around there. I weigh about 205 pounds. my prints from my hiking boot did not sink into the soil at all. They left like marks on the surface of the soil, and these prints were anywhere from an inch to an inch and a half deep in an area where I didn't make any discernible depression in the soil at all. And I didn't even think about that until later. I looked at the photos again after I'd gotten home. So that's when I decided to send you the email and ask for your opinion about what it was. And after we discussed what we discussed, I have a fairly certain conclusion that they were probably juvenile prints, and possibly two of them are two different individuals, because when you look at the prints, even though they're both from a right foot, they look different from each other. And then possibly the poop or the scat that we found, being in the area it was, the size of it, two different colors, maybe if it wasn't a bear, possibly around our camp that night. It's possible that maybe it was a juvenile Sasquatch roaming around our camp that night, and that's the breathing that I heard. So all these things have kind of just really piqued my curiosity, and maybe, led me to the conclusion that it probably wasn't a bear that was sniffing around our camp that night. And I was just looking for a little bit of validation from you guys to make sure that I was actually seeing what I was seeing, and I wasn't just drawing, easy conclusions, so to speak. And that's kind of what happened.
No, my opinion, based on all the tracks I've seen, is these are juvenile Sasquatch tracks.
So, and that's after talking to you, I can wholeheartedly agree with that. I just, in my mind at the time, I was just so skeptical because there's so much foot traffic in that area. There's so many campers. Like, you typically hear about Sasquatch and Bigfoot being up in the Pacific Northwest in Canada, but I never thought in a million years I'd find them in Southern California. So,
well, go ahead.
Oh, Kevin, I was just going to ask. That's such an incredible account, and I just want to ask, how were the coyotes behaving differently in your experience from what you knew before?
Well, I'll be honest. I've hardly, in our suburban area where we live here in Southern California, they never really howl. They usually just yip and bark, and they might try to affect kind of a howl, but it always kind of gets interrupted by a bark. I don't know how else to explain it, and it's a really high pitched kind of, it's just that high pitched tone that almost hurts your ears sometimes if they're close enough by. These sounds, the yips and the barks, sounded similar to here, but they were a deeper tone. And the howls were long and sustained, almost like a wolf would do, but they weren't the same tone as a wolf. The tone was deeper than a coyote tone, but didn't sound like a wolf tone. It was just weird. It didn't quite make sense.
Hey, Kevin, this is Tom. I'm going to jump in. A couple things. Coyotes, I've heard them pretty much most of my life. We got them here in Oregon. I consider them an invasive species. We'll just leave it at that. But they do have a very high-pitched yip, and their howls are very high-pitched. I've never heard the coyotes with a low, and even when they howl, the duration is very short. So I don't think you heard coyotes. That's my opinion.
Well, it's it's almost eerie to me now that this is all kind of coming together, because I know I want to go back to that area. So it's kind of definitely going to have my head on a swivel now. But my curiosity is also piqued because of this experience too. But what you said about the howls not being sustained, that's kind of like the coyotes here are. And usually, even if they do a howl and it's real short, at least where I live, they'll never finish. The howl never gets from start to finish. There's always a interruption in it, at least here where I live. And the howls that we heard were not that high pitched tone, not necessarily a deep tone, like I said, somewhere in the middle. but they were sustained from start to finish. And I think that's the part that caught my wife off guard too, and made her mention it.
I can tell you a difference too is, in the area where I grew up in the South Puget Sound area, when these things were being recorded, they would be those sustained, kind of long, drawn-out vocals. And in coyotes, known coyotes were recorded near them. This happened in the Puyallup Screamer, but I also heard them in other areas. And they talked about, and it was a good point, they talked about with known coyotes, you get a lot of yipping and barking and things, a lot of different noises mixed in. And the Sasquatch noises didn't have any of that.
Interesting. Wow.
Also, that area, there's a couple things. That area has a real history that I've been looking at of activity there, a lot of sightings. And also, people camping. People might think, like you did, that they wouldn't come around a lot of people out there camping. And the opposite's true, because we're kind of a good source of, grabbing a quick snack. People leave things out, their coolers, all kinds of stuff. So, and people are trashy. I hate to say it, but they are when they're camping. A lot of times they'll leave stuff laying around, and it's a good source for animals to come and, grab a snack from.
Yeah, I've experienced that with other animal species too, and you're always supposed to practice good hygiene around camp when you're theoretically in bear country. Now, Southern California bear country is not like bear country in other places, but they always say you're still supposed to put your stuff away, or if you're actually backpacking and not car camping, you're supposed to use your bear canisters and all this stuff. So everything I had was put away. It was in the bed of I have a bed cover that covers the bed of my truck, and everything was inside there, and my tailgate was up. I only had like one camping box on the ground that had like some camping supplies in it, but nothing that was food or drink related. And none of that stuff was disturbed. And again, the only noise I heard was that breathing, and I couldn't be sure about anything else that I heard. So it was just really, I don't know, just really weird. Is it possible, though, that maybe we were being watched earlier in the evening? Because where we were at, even though we were inside the tree line, I have these little battery-powered lights that I kind of string around my tent because it helps light up our campsite at night. And we had this little propane fire stove, or like a fire pit going that runs off propane because of the summer fire restrictions. But that light would have been visible probably from the other side of the meadow if you were on the other side of the meadow. So
yeah,
I mean,
it's very likely they were watching you, probably as you came into the location.
Wow, so that means, we were there even during the daytime even, so it's possible that they noticed him even earlier, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Kevin, let me just ask, because you also said that there was movement outside the tent.
Well, what I thought was movement, right? Yeah. I thought I heard movement, like, so where my truck was parked is bare mineral earth, and then out about probably 20 to 30 feet away from the truck is where, because people would camp right where we were, so it's down to bare mineral earth, and then as you get further away from the truck, I said about 20, 30 feet is where there were still some pine needles and like pine cones and stuff on the ground. I thought I heard something moving around, but like I said, I couldn't be sure because my wife was snoring just a little bit, and I didn't want to, I didn't want to draw a conclusion because I couldn't be 100% sure, so to speak. So I kind of discounted it until I heard the breathing noises.
Kevin, I'm going to jump in real quick. Just a comment on because we got the pictures, and by the way, excellent pictures. We're going to post those on the web. And Will, you probably would agree, those are probably some of the better juvenile footprints that we've had submitted to us, right?
Yeah, those are excellent tracks.
Yeah, very good. So kudos on that, and kudos on your wife for, or was it you or your wife that thought they might be Bigfoot prints?
Well, she noticed them first on the ground, And I was probably 10 feet away from her walking around, and I noticed her. She stopped, and she's looking down at the ground. So I walked over, and she jokingly said, "Oh, these might be Bigfoot prints initially." And I didn't respond right away, and I just kind of looked at them for a second, and then I had to admit to her, yeah, they might be. So she initially found them. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm just trying to remember, so I hope I'm not wrong. What's your wife's background?
So she's a non-sworn employee for a law enforcement agency in Southern California, and I'm not going to say who it is or whatnot.
Right.
And then as far as me, I'm a firefighter in Southern California.
Okay. Yeah. Very good.
Any other questions?
No, I'm just curious as. Yeah, sorry about that. Well, the question I had was just the fact that something drew her attention to those footprints, and that's what I found interesting. She took a look at them, and can you ask her what was it that made her drew her attention to those footprints?
Okay, she is actually in the room, so hold on one second. Let me see. They just are asking the question, what was it about the footprints that drew your attention to them, like that made them stand out to you? She's being a little shy right now. She doesn't want to talk to me.
Okay, that's fine. I don't want to put her on the spot. I was just curious. Something drew her attention to it, and then even though she jokingly said, "Oh, these are Bigfoot prints," oftentimes when people say things in jest, there's a little more behind it than just joking.
Well, they always, I guess I've heard that behind every joke is some level of truth, or however the saying goes.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking. And so something piqued her suspicion, I think, when she looked at those prints, that they were not quite human. And they only look vaguely human. Yeah, and she mentioned when we were looking at them how they look different than human prints, as well when she was looking at them, because there were, like I said, there were other barefoot human prints in the area, and she mentioned how big they were compared to the human footprints. Because even though these are, in terms of Bigfoot prints, small, juvenile, they're still bigger than the human footprints that were in the area next to them or around them. So, and that's what she mentioned stood out to her. Right, and arguably, I think they'd be not only the size is different, but they are. It's not just the size; the shape is very different. Yeah, that's the part that stood out to me, was the shape. And as we're talking about this, and I go over it in my mind, like if I was to put so I have a wide foot for my size, so I wear like a 2E wide shoe, so I have wide feet in terms of human feet. And if I was to put my even with my hiking boot on, if I was to put my foot down into that print, it would have been anywhere from at least to an inch and a half wider than my foot. Yeah, the dimensions are very different than human dimensions. So I find it interesting. You have a size 10 boot, right? Yeah. Yes. Yep. And it, and you compare that to a juvenile Bigfoot. What does that tell you for the size of these creatures? Well, and that, what really struck me though was I was thinking of more in terms of how much this thing weighs. If it made an inch to an inch and a half depression in the soil, that when I stand on it, just barely makes a mark on the surface. That's kind of what struck me more than anything. After being home and thinking about it more. Even regardless of the size, it weighs a lot, which is intimidating. Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And so if you guys saw these footprints versus, and you also saw some barefoot human footprints.
Correct.
So describe the human footprints. Or were they just like kind of on surface? Just
So the human footprints that we saw around these, the closest one was probably 2 or 3 feet away, and they were little like that initial, like one of the prints in the picture I sent you. They were like right on the edge of the water, so maybe the soil was, obviously it's a little softer right there, but they still didn't go down as deep as those. I mean, I don't know, like 1/4 of an inch maybe, like enough to, just deep enough to where they made a really clear outline and you could see like that hourglass shape from the arch on a human foot.
Hey, Kevin, let me just jump in real quick. You said that there are no arches on their feet, and could you just describe that a little bit more?
Are you're referring to the prints that we took pictures of? Okay,
yeah.
Okay, let's see if I can describe this the best way I can. So if you look at human footprints in soft soil, or I don't like. I've had my feet measured, because for like athletic running shoes, because I have wide feet. Like you go to the running store and they'll measure your feet and they'll have you step on like a soft material, and then they'll have a computer like analyze it to see, you got a flat arch, high arch, or this or that. So when I look at a human foot, you look at like up by the forefoot where the toes are, and even the toes, and it's wide. And as you get more towards the middle of the foot where the arch is, on the outside of the foot, sometimes it'll be a straight line, and then where the arch is, there'll be a very noticeable curve in to where it's narrower, and then it'll widen slightly back out to where the heel is again. Typically, though, where the rounded portion of the back of the heel is compared to the forefoot is still very narrow in proportion to the forefoot on a human. When I look at these prints, it was really wide up by the toes, and they did narrow towards the heel, but there was no curve in like the typical arch for a human. And even at the heel is still super wide. Like some human prints, when you look at them, to me, the heel could be almost half as wide as the forefoot, and the heel on these juvenile prints were not half as wide as the forefoot area.
Let me jump in a minute. I'm looking at the picture right now, and I'm going to tell you something about the footprints here. When you look at human prints, like you mentioned, the human prints show the arch of the foot. Sasquatch tracks are typically flat-footed, no arch. And when you look at these pictures, especially the one where it shows the big toe, there's some slippage there in the dirt. That one you can tell it's extremely flat-footed. And the toes are a key also. You see how the toes, and this is going to be on the web, folks, so you'll be able to see this picture. The toes are very clearly the one they look like John Green described in one of his books, peas in a pod. You see how they're very rounded, very impressed. That's because those folks back then felt that these things walked with their toes curled. So the toes are pressing directly down, whereas ours are more or less flat, and you see kind of elongated toes. Mm-hmm. That's a very, very classic Sasquatch feature. And also the angle of the toes. When you look at human feet, they're not like that at all.
Interesting. I hadn't put that together.
And very good point about the width of the track, and also right on down to the heel. Human tracks aren't like that.
I got to tell you, it feels good in a sense that some gentlemen such as yourselves have kind of validated what my suspicions were, but at the same time, it makes me, I don't want to say nervous now, but like I'm going to pay a lot more attention when I'm in the woods now, because I've listened to your guys' podcasts and stuff, and it's, when these things are around, they're not like cuddly little animals that you can go give a hug to, I guess.
No, definitely not.
So, yeah. So, but but like I said, my curiosity is piqued, and it's like now it's like I can't help but think that like when I'm out in the woods now, I'm gonna be like, I don't know, I don't want to use the word like hyper alert, but it's gonna be on my mind now the whole time I'm there, and it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of changed my whole outlook now.
Your point of view is permanently changed.
Yeah. Yes.
It does.
It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop me from going out in the woods. I mean, I love it. I love the outdoors. I grew up camping in the Sierras with my folks when I was a kid. But like, I'm not going to be as oblivious, I guess, to my surroundings and stuff when I'm out there now.
Kevin, you're absolutely right. It changes everything. You know that you're out there, you got company, and they're probably, they're certainly more aware of you and are more aware of us than we are of them. I'd also want to make a comment, and you and I talked about this when we were on the phone, about those footprints, okay, the toes, the kind of the peas in the pod, how round they are. And, you're glad that you're being validated from us. But I also wanted to say that you validated a set of footprints that I have, that it was the same thing. I was like, they almost looked artificial, I thought, except they were in an area that couldn't possibly be artificial because of that shape of the toes. And Will, I just want to say that helps me out as well with the set of footprints that I had that I thought looked odd. They don't look human, and they have that rounded feature to them. And folks, you'll see this on the web. You're going to see Kevin's footprint on there, and you'll see what we're talking about with the toes.
Yeah, it's very classic. I have casts here in my office that have that exact feature. Even the Patterson tracks, one of those, or a few of those, have the very, and I'll send you a picture, Tom, so you can put on the website to compare, to show one of the Patterson Sasquatch tracks that show those same kind of toes.
Okay. Yeah,
so,
great.
I do have a question that kind of keeps lingering on my mind. So the poop or the scat that I found being two sort of piles overlapping each other but being different color. When I Googled bear scat when I got home, pictures popped up that looked similar to what I saw, but the dimensions and size were way off. I mean, am I way off in thinking that the poop or the scat we found are related to these tracks? And do you guys think that this is maybe one individual, or based off the tracks that you guys are looking at, is it possible there might have been two individuals, or am I way off with that? That's why I'm upset at myself for not taking that photo.
Well, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to ask you, though, isn't it true, wouldn't we agree that, generally speaking, where there's one, there's more? So to say there's only two, I would say might be an underestimate. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Will, what are your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, no, if there were juveniles there were probably adults nearby, too.
So, I mean, something else that struck me as odd when I have listened to the podcast. So we find these footprints down near the water, completely open area, where they were, like, it was closer to the edge of the meadow where the water was, on the way the current flows through there. So where the footprints were, again, is probably about 150 yards to the nearest tree where the tree line starts. But then behind them was probably another mile across the meadow to the other side. I don't understand like behavior, because everything I understand that I've listened to or that I've started reading about, they like to move in cover and don't like to be out in the open. So what do you think was going on that would have them out there by the water like that? I mean, would they, like, can you help me understand that a little bit maybe, or? Well,
you always got to follow the food. Most of what they're doing is food related, and the juveniles are less experienced, so, they might do things that the adults wouldn't.
Got it.
Hey, Will, if I can just pop in for a second. Do you think that most of the footprints that are discovered are maybe from juveniles? I mean, because arguably the thing is that the adults live in the mountains, and then the juveniles go downstairs, or go down into the woods there to maybe hunt food. And I'm just curious, like what do you think? I mean, are most footprints that you've seen from juveniles or adults?
Oh, by far adults. And they're going to stay together as groups. The juveniles aren't going to stray too far from the adults.
Okay, interesting. But do you think that maybe juveniles are the biggest hunters for the adults, or no?
No. They're learning just like human children would. They're going to be learning things from the adults. So just out of curiosity, how influential are the adults, like the female mother, responsible for teaching the juveniles? Oh, I don't know. I mean, quite a bit, I'm sure, but I'm also sure that the rest of the group is, instructing them on things also. You have to look at other primate species to get that answer, because it's going to be very similar to what other primate species do.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
I have one more question for you guys. Going back to the fact that my situational awareness in the woods is going to be completely different now, but my curiosity is just kind of been thrown into overdrive. Like before, I knew his Bigfoot growing up as a kid. I saw the Legend of Boggy Creek film. I've always had an interest in it, but I never pursued it or did anything with it, right? But after this situation happened, when I go back to these areas now, me and my wife have plans to visit other areas in the Sierra chain this summer. Plans that were already being looked at, though, that aren't a direct result of this event happening. I'm not going to be going out necessarily and purposely looking for more evidence, but we like to go on hikes, and we wanted, some of the places we go, there's peaks that we want to go that would be off trail, not necessarily following the typical hiking trail. How do you guys recommend I conduct myself in the future? We're in areas and I'll just say the specific area where I found these prints, there's some peaks around this meadow that me and my wife looked at and said, yeah, we'd like to go hike up there and explore that. So how do you suggest I handle myself? Because I'm curious and I want to go look around, but I don't want to get myself in a bad situation, so to speak.
Well, just be aware of your surroundings like you would with a bear. And I'll send you some photos of things to watch for that can give you an idea if something is in the area currently.
Okay.
Don't put yourself in a situation where it could cause a problem. In other words, don't be alone. Think in terms like if there is a big cat in the area, stalking, and what you would do in a situation like that.
Got it. I just didn't know. Just kind of treat it like you would any other
like other wildlife, absolutely, any other predatory animal, exactly.
Okay.
And if it's broad daylight, they're probably not going to do anything. If you get things thrown at you, I wouldn't be too concerned unless it's big rocks. Then you want to get away from there because they're not happy. I don't think it'd stick around long either if they started throwing grapefruit-sized rocks at me. So that's a cue. But typically they're not going to do much to you unless you're doing something they don't want you to do, which is like if you're in their area at night and you're disrupting a hunt or something like that.
Yeah. Will, let me just kind of interrupt for a second. Do you think that these creatures are mostly nocturnal, and that pretty much in the day, they might find people annoying, but they're not going to attack them. But if it's at night when they're trying to, hunt, that might be something different.
Well, I wouldn't say nocturnal. They're not nocturnal. They're diurnal, which means they're equally active in day and night. But you have to look at what the prey animals are doing. That's what dictates their behavior. So if the deer are moving, to and from bedding areas right around dusk, and then again at dawn, that's the time periods they're going to be most active. Again, it's all around their food gathering.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
Any other questions, fellas, or?
I guess not. But does Tom have any other questions, or no?
No, I don't have any other questions, but I do have a comment. Kevin, thank you so much for this, for the footprint photographs and also for contacting us, because great information, and unfortunately it sounds like you've kind of got hooked on this.
Yeah, not by choice, but I mean,
yeah.
I can relate
it's intriguing.
So I just want to say thank you to you gentlemen too for taking the time to look at my photos and educate me a little and help me understand what I was looking at, and like for a little validation, like I said, because I was highly skeptical, and part of me almost didn't want it to be, but at least I can go forward now and with reasonable certainty that's what I was seeing. So
I would say absolutely that's what you found.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, gentlemen. I really do appreciate it.
Kevin, we really appreciate it, and stay in touch, buddy.
I will, especially if I find anything else.
Yeah, and I'll be sending you more things to look at and watch for.
All right. Thank you.
All right, fellas, that'll do it for this segment. Welcome back from the break, everyone, and as you all might be able to tell, we have a new intro and bridge music, so hope everybody enjoys that. Our good friend Adam Lima has created those for us, and Adam, we certainly appreciate that, buddy. So Tom, what do we have on the table today?
We have a kind of a general discussion and a couple questions. I'm going to start off with this gentleman, Tony, in Australia. And it's a little bit of an open-ended question, but he says, I'm interested to hear what witness account you found that was the most spine-chilling and unforgettable.
There's actually quite a number of them, but there's a couple that sort of pop into my mind. 3 of them, actually. The first one was with Troy, and I can't remember I think that was North or South Carolina where this happened, and where him and a couple buddies went out fishing, and broad daylight, they heard this creature on the ridge above them screaming, and it raced down the ridge directly at them, screaming the whole time, and it was very close to them, and it threw just this tantrum. I mean, they had to be just terrified, during the whole event. Another one was, there were actually a couple of stories that our good friend TW told us from New Mexico, and one of them had to do with the Apache gentleman who was tending to some sick cattle for a rancher, and in the middle of the night thought that it was one of his buddies playing a prank, grabbing his leg or touching his leg, and he grabbed the cattle prod and zaps this creature that was starting to climb the ladder, and it was one of these things, and it was actually trying to get him, and he jumped out of the barn, and it killed the sick cattle who were in the barn. And then there was a third incident where there was a family out doing yard work, whole family in broad daylight. They had a mastiff, went barking and tearing out towards the direction of whatever noise it heard, discovered what was there too late. The Sasquatch grabbed the dog, tore it in half, and threw it at the family. All of those to me, and there's more, of course, more stories, but those three sort of popped right out at the moment.
Yeah, those last two were from TW.
Yeah.
The one in the middle was the one that I remember listening to. And I got to tell you, even though it's spine tingling, the way TW was telling it, I had tears in my eyes. I was laughing so hard.
Well, true.
You know, good old TW. I guess it was one of the cowboys was sleeping up in the hayloft.
It was the Native American gentleman. It's
the Mescalero. Okay, yeah. All right, or Apache, yeah. So he's sleeping up there, and I guess he'd had a few beers and thought, well, I'll sleep up here instead of driving home. Okay, so he's being responsible, and then something starts touching his leg, and he's like, I know what that is. They're messing with me. So he grabs it, cattle prod, zaps it, and my favorite part where I started laughing is when TW goes, and that's when the rodeo began.
You can only imagine this massive thing, you know, is kind of testing the waters, gets zapped by the cattle prod, it falls down, pissed off, and then it's trying to get him. And he's between a rock and a hard spot at that point. Thank goodness he was able to jump from, you know, the loft of the barn out onto the ground and run like heck to get away. But, the fact that the thing killed, 5 or 6 head of cattle who were in the barn and tore the place up, that's pretty frightening.
It's very frightening, and it shows that it was just taking out its rage on whatever was close by.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it had got its hands on this Indian, that would have been it.
Ham sandwich time.
Ham sandwich and lots of chunks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then the other one that was TW had shared the one with the and he said it was a 130-pound dog, 125, 130 pounds. It's a big dog.
Yeah, we used to have a Mastiff, and they're big dogs, very strong.
Yeah, and Mastiffs are not only strong, but they're intelligent. They're just, like you said, they're very powerful. Didn't last a second with this thing.
No, not at all. The dog tried to get away, and it was just too late.
Oh, yeah. And it's like, oh, man, tore the dog. The dog, that's a family member. And
you have to wonder, it threw the halves of the dog at the people, like it was making a display of some kind. What was going on in its head that it did that in broad daylight. It was sort of a in-your-face kind of a thing.
Making a point.
Yeah, I mean, you can only speculate, of course, but yeah, it was absolutely trying to make a point of some kind.
Right. My guess is it was about 1001, 1002, and everybody's in the house. Right?
I would assume so, yeah.
And the story that you talked about with Troy, that was actually my first interview with you. So that goes back, I think, a couple of years at least. And I remember that. And one of the parts I remember was he said it bared its teeth at him. And he was 20 feet away on the other side of this creek or river or whatever. He could see one of the, he could see a missing tooth in it.
Yeah, he had very good detail. Fascinating account.
Yeah. Scary stuff. But, that kind of brings up an interesting question that I've had for some time, and that is, are there any reports, what are your thoughts about one of these things assaulting somebody, maybe just hitting them, but not taking them, not killing them, but just maybe, swatting at them? Are there any stories like that that you've heard of?
I always like to think, when I think of something like that, I kind of go back to the Cowman story, where the father and son went out to see where his son had said the Cowman was. And they went out and they found, hair on the fence, and they went out into the woods. and he told the son to go back. I can't remember if they had seen it or what the details were at the moment, but he heard a noise, and he knew what was happening. The thing had gone around him, was heading back toward where his son was running, and the thing had actually came and sort of did a scooping motion, and then I think the father shot at it, and it dropped the son. Didn't actually grab him; it sort of scooped and knocked him down that way. But I can't think off the top of my head. I know there are stories where things have happened to people, but actually swatting them, where anybody at least walked away. There was the story, again, TW told us about his friend, John, who had inadvertently squirted one of these things with a water hose while he was watering his tomatoes, and the thing had walked through the yard, and I guess instinctually he shot at it with the water hose, and apparently made it displeased, and he was gone for a time from his home and came back and was napping, and the thing had gotten into his house, and he woke up and it was standing over him and proceeded to beat the heck out of him and tossed him around like a rag doll and bit his finger off in the melee, and then knocked him out by slamming into a wall. So I think that's a pretty graphic example. Yeah.
For the thing to come into your house, into your abode where you live, it's an ultimate invasion, and the creature knows it too.
And then, of course, was the event that happened in the film The Legend of Boggy Creek, where there were the folks, the thing reached through the window, and as they went out, to see or to confront the creature, it had doubled back on the porch or never left the porch, and grabbed the one guy and knocked him down and proceeded to pummel him with the back of its hands. And no major injuries, but it obviously pretty shook up.
And I think I've heard, it's interesting when we talk about pummeling with the back of its hands. I think that's either gorilla or chimp or maybe both behavior that they have done that. People have been assaulted by these things.
Yeah,
they don't
use the back of their hands.
Yeah, they don't use the palm, and they don't double up their fists. They just work you over with the back of their hands. So, these creatures,
not like humans.
Right. And these things are doing the same kind of behavior. So
exactly.
Okay, so this thing went into his house, and I think we've spoken with Brenda in the past, and I think Brenda talked about there was one incident where I don't think it went in the house, but it stood right at the door. Now, I could be wrong. It may have gone in, or it may have just stood at the door and looked in the house.
I think that was her encounter, wasn't it?
She had an encounter like that, but later on she was talking about another family where the thing had gone up on the porch and may have gone in the house and turned around and left. Maybe we'll have to check with her on that.
Yeah.
But have you heard of any other incidents, any other encounters where people have talked about this thing actually coming in their house?
Lots of attempts. I'm not sure about actually entering, but plenty of attempts to come in.
Okay. So, and, we know how to work a door handle. It's just instinctual. A little kid knows how to do it.
Right.
But these creatures may not until they've done it one time. I don't know. I just wonder if it might be a little bit of a learning process to understand how it works.
Well, it probably is. And the fact that they've got a little different thumb configuration than we do. And a lot of people think, well, they've got hands like ours so they can do the same things. And they really can't, because what it means to have an opposable thumb is a big thing with humans. And it's very, it's specialized. In other words, we've got a big portion of our brain that sort of, you can have the mechanical parts, but if you don't have the software to run that, it doesn't operate the same way. And ours is developed over many thousands of years, that part of our brain that actually operates that opposable thumb.
Right. So chimps and gorillas have a thumb, but it's not opposable. They could not.
Yeah, they don't have the fine motor skills. I mean, they can operate it in similar fashions, but not the fine motor skills that humans have because we have that specialized area of the brain.
Yeah. So we're not going to see a gorilla or chimp anytime in the future picking up a pencil and
Probably
writing.
not, no.
So one of the things, we're talking about their hands, but you and I had talked about their feet, and I brought up I think it's Eric Shipton, who attempted to climb the summit of Mount Everest. Instead of doing that, he found those footprints. And what caught my attention was the first two, the large toe and then the second one. And then the other three seem to be independent of that. You and I had talked about that earlier and brought it to your attention. Then to really drive the point home, you sent me a picture of a cast that you took in Washington State that looks so much like the Eric Shipton cast. Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's not exactly. I mean, the Sasquatch tracks and the Yeti tracks there's a lot of differences between them. But one of the features that I've noticed, through you and I discussing this, on a number of casts, there's a variation that's different than other casts. And that's the big toe and the one next to it, in those tracks that were from Washington State. Those are the Grays Harbor tracks from 1982 that a deputy sheriff there cast. But what they exhibit is you look at those toes, the toes are very close in size to one another. And then the other three toes, now while they're not separate, but they appear to sort of break away at an angle, where the first two don't. It's a feature that's present in some Sasquatch prints, but not others. So that sort of indicates to me that there's a couple of varieties here, indicated by their feet.
Yeah, you look at that, and really you think primitive, primate, and the large toe I'm talking about now. This is the one that you cast in Washington.
I didn't cast that one. That was a deputy sheriff that cast that.
Oh, he did. Okay, but it originated in Washington State.
Yeah, from Grays Harbor County.
Okay, so you get the big toe, and then the next toe over is also much larger, and then the other three toes are really small. It just looks almost nothing like a human foot.
Yeah, there's some definite differences there.
It's not to mention it's a very wide foot. So you would think that this creature I would almost think of it as being very ape-ish. Saw one.
There's some ape-like qualities to it, but yet they're different again. It's sort of, it's a variation that's sort of on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Exhibit similarities from other species, but also different.
Well, and you and I have talked about there's 4 basic types, maybe 5, but we know there's 4 types. But out of the 4 types, didn't you say there's over 20 variations?
I was told 22 variations.
Okay, 22 variations. So variations within a species, and you're going to end up with some very different, the morphology is going to be different, the foots are different, everything about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here's what I find interesting. So that in my mind, I was seeing kind of a connection between this foot, because, you think of the typical Bigfoot, Sasquatch footprint as being this, 14 to 19 inch footprint that almost looks like a human footprint. This one looks nothing like it, right? This absolutely stands out on its own.
Are we talking the Yeti track or the Washington track?
No, I'm talking the Washington track and the comparison between the two.
It is very human looking on the surface, but when you start looking at the details, then it's not very human at all.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then the Yeti track was, and I remember when I first saw that, I thought, well, it really doesn't look like what I would consider the stereotypical Bigfoot track.
No, not at all. Very different.
Yeah, a very different type of creature.
Now, the cast I have it's actually a copy, or what they did, they made a physical rendition from Eric Shipton's photographs. It's not an actual cast of that print, but it's a rendition of it, but it's very close.
Oh, okay. All right. And then now you have that as well?
Yes.
Okay. So you got the Washington one, you got the Eric Shipton one, and then just a regular footprint. Regular. I say regular. Bigfoot footprint.
I'll put some more pictures together so you can put it on the website for people to see these
I'm
things.
definitely I'll post it on the website. And another connection that I'm going to make, or that I found between what's over there in the Himalayas and over here, is language. And I'd heard this once before, but I was just watching a brief article on YouTube, and this was, it was PBS. They were doing a whole thing on Bigfoot, on the Yeti. And the translation, or the word for the Yeti over there, was Metokangmi. I probably botched it, but it's Metohkangmi, so Metokangmi. What was interesting, the reason it caught my attention, was the Klamath Indians, the Modoc, and I think the Yurok, and those tribes around the, southern Oregon, northern California. They call it Metokangmi. So it's pronounced almost the same. So it's almost the same word.
Well, if you think about it, anthropologists believe that Native Americans came across the land bridge when the oceans were much lower during the Ice Age, and no, DNA-wise they are related to Asian folks. So it makes sense if they brought some of that language with them. They had a name for the creature there. When they came here, they would have the same name for it.
Yeah, and I find it interesting. That name is almost identically preserved from across the land bridge, into this one particular tribe. So
yeah, it's very interesting, the connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So what can we, we've talked about the up in Northern California it redefines what remoteness is about, at least in the lower 48. It's exceedingly remote.
Most people have no idea just how remote that is. And I've mentioned it on shows before that I've been up there many times. And you can be in areas where you don't see people or vehicles for weeks.
Yeah.
It's very remote.
But you do see one thing on the road. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
Oh, the droppings?
Yes, the scat.
There are areas, some of my favorite places to go, where during a portion of the summertime, you find Sasquatch scat. And they're not shy about where they do it. It's on roads and pretty much everywhere. And you can tell how long they've been in there. It's usually between 1 and 2 months, and then they leave the area. You won't find anything. And I've mentioned before that one day there was so much of it we'd seen that I thought, I'm going to count, the next day I'm going to count this. So starting off at first light the next morning, every time we come across a pile of this stuff, and it wasn't bear scat, not when you're talking 2+ inches thick, up to 4 inches thick, that's not bear. So I counted in a 35 square mile area 50 piles. Now they're various ages from stuff that had just been deposited to up to a month old, but it just indicated there was a lot of activity in the area and that they'd been eating pretty well. Yeah,
and they're walking along roads made by humans that are quite convenient.
And just stop, and there it is.
Yeah. Well, and these things also travel along the power line cuts through the forest.
Yeah.
But so does everything else. So does the elk, so do deer, bear,
right,
mountain lions. You go along those power line cuts, you'll see all kinds of... Yeah, absolutely. And it's convenient because you can go along a path of least resistance And if necessary, if you need to hide, you just duck right back into the forest.
I found it interesting. We were talking about vocalizations, and I look at things, how other primates behave and do things. And there was a similarity that struck me just yesterday. I was looking at a video about chimp behavior, and they were talking about when chimps get ready to, go to sleep, that they use a different vocalization than the things they do throughout their normal day, and will announce when basically they're going to bed. And I often wondered, after thinking about that, some of the vocals that Sasquatches do, if maybe they aren't doing that sometimes as well, as kind of a similar behavior.
That's interesting, because how many times have we been asked, what does it mean when you hear this vocalization? And we're like, well, we don't really speak the language, so we don't know.
Right. And you could certainly, if it's a possibility, you could incorporate that into what's going on. If it's similar to what other primates do, then it's certainly worth thinking about anyway.
Yeah, that's definitely on the table. And some of the other vocalizations, you got the screams, and I suppose you could, if they're going to be doing it for, you said they're announcing, hey, it's time to go to bed. Well, is it limited to just that, or would they use it for other things? I would imagine they might use it for time to go hunting.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Ambush. And
it's probably
all sorts of things.
It's probably like when you see what chimps do when they get ready to hunt. Oftentimes it's nonverbal communication. There was one video, I found it was fascinating. There was a fairly large group of chimps, and when the alpha decided it was time to go hunting monkeys, he kind of dropped down on his hands and slapped the tree with his feet, and they all fell into line. It's like they all knew exactly what their positions were and what they were supposed to do, and it was virtually flawless, the hunt. So
they're acting as a pack.
Yeah.
Okay, and I would...
So we hear noises like tongue pops and things like that. What if that's a signal for hunting or what have you?
Right. And I wouldn't be, I think as a primate, they're going to rely on audio-visual, sight and sound. So I wouldn't be surprised if during the hunt, they wouldn't be using hand signals or some other sort of visual signal to communicate. You go there, and you two go attack, or something like that.
There was another interesting one too, where there was a young monkey that was being kind of bullied by an adult female that had a lot of status in the group, where his own mother couldn't defend him because of that difference in status in the group. And the little guy would chatter his teeth. Well, I've heard from a number of witnesses hearing noises like teeth chattering, and in the monkeys, what that was a submissive noise, where it was trying to be submissive through that chattering of its teeth. And you just have to wonder sometimes when you hear these different sounds, if there aren't parallels of some kind going on.
Exactly, because those sounds aren't random. They've got to have purpose. And, I've heard the whistles, I've heard the screams, and, the for lack of a better word, a scream bark, and some other sounds. They're not random.
No, they have it for a reason.
Absolutely.
And we can speculate. I mean, the whistle is one of the most prominent ones. That's the one Native Americans make note of the most. Our friend Dan up in Canada, who found the really great tracks when he encountered that creature, and it was probably a juvenile based on the size of the prints and the description of it that he had, because he actually saw it run through a small clearing. The creature didn't run from him. It changed position. And as he approached the tree line where it whistled at him. And so it was right there. And that kind of spooked him. So I have to wonder, the purpose of the whistle sometimes. I mean, is that a warning?
Oh.
Is it a signal to other individuals? Being a juvenile, there may have been other ones nearby. We don't know. He didn't search the area for more tracks.
Right. Well, that's interesting you bring that up, because the first time that you and I spoke, it was because I had heard a loud whistle, and a friend of mine was up in the Cascades getting a Christmas tree, and I told this story 100 times before, but I had made a loud noise about a minute or two before I heard the whistle, and then just went on about my business. And then there was one loud, sharp whistle, and I just, that makes sense. Maybe it was a warning, because I was actually, now that I think about it, I'd made this loud noise. Generally speaking, I was walking in the direction where this creature was, not having any idea if there was anything there. Then there's a loud whistle, and my buddy goes, "What was that?" Maybe phrased differently. So anyway, just that's an interesting thought.
And lots of noise. I mean, things like growls. I know I was on the phone with Jason, our friend in New Mexico, that we've had him on before, and we're hopefully going to have him on here soon with some new stuff going on. But he was asking me about what the purpose of a growl was. And I've been growled at once by these things. It was not a pleasant experience. I turned around and did not utilize that trail ever again. The purpose of the growl, I don't know. Is it a warning? Does it have some other purpose? We don't know.
Well, why do dogs growl? Why do cats snarl? Big cats. Why does any animal? I think it is a warning. It's got to be.
I would assume so. Yeah. It's like, okay, you're close enough. That's it. Don't press your luck, buddy.
Yeah. And it's got to have. They have to realize the effect it has. They growl at somebody, they never see that person ever again.
Yeah, I think it's got to be instinctual among animals, or it's just sort of built into their toolbox. When I growl, that's a pretty good chance that whatever I'm facing off against is going to stop and maybe retreat.
Yes. And, if you think about it, although humans don't really growl, when you get into that situation of aggression, anger, response, threatened, you lower your voice, like, hey, let's, you see what I mean? Yeah. That sort of thing.
It's a signal. Yeah, definitely.
So it's not hard to relate to that. And again, you hear the growl, and I can't imagine, we've never heard of anybody, because you may not hear from them, who proceeded towards the growl.
No, and again, it goes back to, in nature, physical contact, physical fight can be a death sentence, So you want to use whatever you can to, scare the other guy and not get in that situation.
Yeah. And a growl is very effective.
It is, yeah.
So just out of curiosity, can you kind of relate what happened in your situation where you heard the growl?
Oh, well, I talked before about, when my friend John and I, we lived, as the crow flies, maybe half a mile from each other. So we had a trail, not a very clear trail, but we knew how to find it through the woods that went between my house and his, and I had to go up a neighbor's driveway to cut over onto the beginning of the trail. So I was walking up their driveway one day. I was going to go over to his house. I was a teenager then. I don't know how old, probably, 17 or so. But I walked by a large patch of blackberry bushes that lined their driveway on the other side of their fence. And a section that was probably, 20 feet or so wide, very thick. It shook violently, and I heard this deep growl coming from the other side of it, and I just stopped. It froze me, and I just thought, oh crap. I turned around and walked right back the way I came, and I never went that way again, ever. That was it. And coincidentally, that was also the same area where John found the deer with its head twisted.
Oh, okay. All right. So this was like real close to John's house, right?
No, it was closer to my house, actually, and not that far from where I encountered those two creatures.
Really?
I guess it must have been a year later, year and a half after I'd had that encounter, that I was going to go over to John's house one day, and that didn't happen, so.
I didn't know. So the bushes shook violently.
Yeah.
And you got a growl. Two
yeah.
things.
Oh yeah. that was a pretty clear warning. I wasn't going to mess around with that. And we knew that area pretty well. There weren't any bear around there, so, and it wasn't any kind of a dog growl. It was nothing like that. This was very loud. It was very deep. So it was big, whatever did it.
Right. And I've never heard.
I don't know if it was one of these things. I didn't see it, but I can only assume based on past events that happened in that location.
Right. Well, and of course, use a process of elimination.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, well, bears, the number one candidate besides these things would be bears. Mm-hmm. They just don't do that.
No.
Shake it. If they're going to attack you, they're going to attack you.
Yeah.
So bears are out of the picture. All the hoofed animals are completely out of the picture. They don't growl.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And now we got mountain lions.
Yeah, I don't remember ever seeing any sign of cats around there, ever.
And even if you did,
and it wasn't a growl like that. I've heard cats growl. It wasn't anything like that.
And they don't shake bushes.
No.
Yeah.
No, something had a hold of those and shook them violently.
Yeah.
It was a clear warning when I think back on it. It was pretty obvious. It was like, get out, don't come back. That was my impression anyway.
Well, what about those guys? You said one guy you knew, he was a biker, and they had gone camping in Southern Oregon, and this thing shook trees at them.
Well, yeah, they rode in there. These guys were, they were Hell's Angels, and they decided they were going to there was $100,000 finding fee, I guess, on the Port Orford meteor, if anybody would ever to locate it. And they thought they would go do that. So they were in that area, set up their camp, had a fire going. They were just standing around, and they heard this noise from up on the ridge above them. And it kept coming down the ridge towards them, these vocals. And they thought it was a person at first. And they said, hey, we're armed down here. You're going to get shot if you don't announce yourself. Nothing ever happened. It kept coming towards them. And after a bit, this thing appeared at the edge of the firelight, and there were saplings, trees there, and it grabbed one on each side and was just thrashing and making vocals. And, it sounded very much like Troy's incident, very similar to that. It just threw this fit. They both had 30-30s. They both shot it in the chest. It ran off screeching, and they took off out of it. One of the guys said, I thought we were going to get eaten, so we got the hell out of there. Why move?
And, you shoot something in the chest with a 30-30. I mean, you can drop large. I mean, you can drop an elk if you do it properly, with a 30-30. And this thing just took off, probably bellowing or screaming.
Yeah,
or who knows what.
He said it just screeched and ran off. So they took it off. Is pretty much all they did.
So time to get on your bikes and leave.
they had the impression it was coming back.
Oh, sure. I bet it was.
Yeah, they wasted no time getting out of there.
Wow. And I've, my wife and I have gone down to Port Orford a number of times. It's a favorite spot for us. It's right there on the coast.
Yeah.
You go east a little ways. I mean, you can throw a rock, and all of a sudden you're into some pretty thick, heavy, coastal forest land that's just Nowheresville. There's nothing out there.
He actually took me down there after he told me the story, and we came in from the east side, and I'm telling you, you can drive a long way in that country, and there is nothing in there, nothing, and it's all very thick, the brush.
Yeah.
He was trying to find the exact spot, and we just didn't have the time. We spent a few days up there, and didn't. I mean, it was years before, probably in the 60s when that happened, but and this was probably early 90s when we went in there. So, it changed enough where you didn't recognize it, but I could certainly see you could have 100 of them in there and you wouldn't never see them.
Right. Yeah. No, it's very remote wilderness. Huh. Yeah, and I can only imagine. And I don't know where these guys were as far as their belief system on these things, but if it was, zero, it went from 0 to 100 in a second.
I don't think they really either didn't know or didn't acknowledge stuff like that back then. It just wasn't in their thinking.
Right. So it had to be a double shock.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Well, I know we've been kind of all over the place. Did we have any questions from listeners?
Well, we had Tony from Australia, and I'm just going to take a real quick look here.
Was that the only question he had, or were there...
That was the only one he had this week. So, but Tony always has he has excellent. He has some really good questions, so we really appreciate that. And I think, as far as I can tell, one gentleman, and this is a guy, I think his name is Sam. He says, "Hi guys, I just wanted to say the show heightens and educates my interest in the subject of these massive creatures." Yes, they are massive. He wanted to thank us for keeping the high bar when it comes to giving your thoughts and experiences. So we want to thank him for that. He says he'll look at mountains in a different way, to the point where there's a sense of mystery and respect. And just a real nice thank you to Creek Devil and the staff here at Creek Devil.
Well, we appreciate that. That's a nice comment.
Yeah, very much so. And that is the goal of, I think we have two goals really of this program. Number one is, of course, we like to entertain people, but we entertain people with education and facts. And we really do enjoy doing that. Yeah, so, and I really wanted to kind of comment on his situation. Again, this is another one of the situations where I don't know what his, if he even gave this a second thought. But look at it from his standpoint. Him and his wife are out camping in the Sierras, and she found a pair of footprints. They sent a picture of those to us. Quite obviously, this was a Bigfoot. Now, it's not the same as hearing them. It's not the same as seeing them. But there is something to be said for looking at footprints right there in front of you, physical evidence that is not a known creature, or at least wasn't until the moment you looked at it.
And folks, that's Kevin from the first segment. And his wife wasn't sure. I think she was more in a teasing mode that, here they are, because there were people footprints there too. But those tracks are very different than the human footprints that were present.
Exactly. And I'm gonna post that on the website with their episode, and just so you can take a look at it and see that it's clearly not, those are not human prints. And by the way, Kevin and I had talked about this. The toes, and you'll see that in there, are almost like round circles. And the reason for that is they grip almost like hands, like fingers, right?
You and I talked about that in the early days, the first pioneers of the subject. Their thought was that these things walked with their toes curled. And oftentimes it gives that appearance because that's what you see of these, what just look like round dots, or what they called peas in a pod.
Exactly. Yeah. And anyway, so that was a moment for Kevin and his wife, and I think he's been very intrigued. They're going to go back to that area, and he's made it clear he has a new interest. Maybe even a new hobby now.
Just don't become a ham sandwich.
Yeah, you want to avoid that.
Or take the ham sandwich with you.
Take it with you.
But you don't really want to do that either.
Probably not. No. I saw a primate show a while back where I cracked me up. They didn't have the whole sandwich, but they had chunks of ham that they were going to go out and try to lure these creatures with. And I was thinking...
They were kind of on the right path.
Right? Yeah.
You want to elaborate a little bit on that? That's kind of funny to me.
Yeah, it was, well, they had it in a bag. They had it like a gunny sack, chunks of ham. And it was a show that was, and I thought actually it was interesting. They were looking for a rumored sighting up in a state of Alaska of monkeys. And it wasn't these things. These were tailed monkeys that were, they grew to a height of 3 to 4 feet, I guess max, but they're very vicious. So they were going to go out in the woods and try to lure these things, and they were bringing along chunks of ham, and I was just like, oh.
Well, now wait a minute. Now, let me put a focus on this. Now, most tailed monkeys are probably, I would say, more vegetarian than anything. So I don't know what possessed them to think that, hey, let's go take ham, the pre-ham sandwich part, to find these tailed monkeys in Alaska. I mean, there isn't much of that makes a lot of sense, really.
That's true. I think what it was somewhere along the lines that it was rumored, or, I'm just kind of trying to pick my memory here. Somehow there was a connection between these things liking ham, or they thought they liked ham. Now, there's not a lot of ham that occurs naturally in Alaska.
No, I wouldn't think so.
And primates, again, are visual and sight and sound. Okay, that's what they focus on. So I don't think they're going to take a look at that. Maybe they would, I don't know. But I don't think they're going to take a look at chunks of ham and, oh, look at that, there's ham.
I think they're going to find the wrong monkeys.
They're going to find the wrong monkeys. Wolves, on the other hand, wolves and bear are going to be very interesting because they're going to smell it. They'll smell it a long ways away. So, but it was interesting. It was like, okay, and it cracked me up because it's like, let's go out in the middle of the wilderness of wildernesses at nighttime carrying a gunny sack full of chunks of ham. Who got that job? How did they get that?
Right. Who's the low man on the pole? You get to carry the ham sandwich.
Right. And by the way, you're carrying the ham sandwich. I want you about 20 yards behind me at all times.
Or way out in front, one of the two.
Yeah, one of the two. Yeah, I just want distance, okay? Way more than social distancing.
Yeah, right.
I want you far away.
That's a new kind of social distancing.
That's right.
This is the carrier of the ham sandwich, and then the rest of us.
Right? If anything comes up, all you got to do is scream. We'll know.
And we'll
head the other way.
And we'll adjust accordingly.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it was interesting. So, all right. So, we've covered quite a few topics. Again, I just, I keep going back to that footprint. It was the similarities, between the one that somebody gave you from Washington State and the Yeti there's some similarities. Well, I guess we'll just put those up on the web.
Yeah, like I said, I'll take some more pictures and, with some of the similarities between footprints and some of the differences. There's a couple here that, two of them from the Bluff Creek area, two different tracks. One's, it's a different, not the Patterson Sasquatch. In fact, there was one that Al Hodgson cast in the early 60s, 63, 64, that's very different than the Patterson Sasquatch. They're about the same size, but the structure of the foot's very different. And it's probably worth putting, there's that one, and there was a 13-inch track that John Green and Renee DeHinden cast. I don't remember off the top of my head when it was. It was probably early 60s also, but it has a similar toe arrangement as the one Hodgson cast, which is completely different than what you see in the Patterson tracks. So a couple different varieties, most likely, in the same area.
Oh, that is interesting. I didn't realize Al Hodgson, I didn't realize he had an interest in casting tracks, because wasn't he was the storekeeper. His brother said, after World War II, he said, "Hey, let's go hunt them monkeys or them apes."
Yeah, let's go find the apes across the river, and he's like, leave them apes alone.
Right, yeah, smart man.
Well, by the time, the 60s rolled around, especially after Jerry Crew's, finds and that started getting in the newspapers, and then people like Green and Hinden and the rest of them that came there and Bob Titmus, he didn't cast a lot of tracks. In fact, I think this is the only one he may have cast. He was up with his wife and Betty Allen, who was one of the... I think she was a syndicated writer for the Eureka Times. So they said, well, if you want to see tracks, something about, you should stop and look at the creek. So he sort of caved and said, all right. And coincidentally, right where they stopped is he went down there and there were tracks there. So they had some plaster and they cast one of the prints, and I have a copy of that here. So... but it's interesting that it's very similar. The toe arrangement especially is what's similar in these two tracks, this Juvenile track and this other one. And then when you look at the Patterson tracks, they're very different from these. The configuration is all different.
Now, is it similar to the one that you have from Washington State?
Well, the toes are all very similar in size. All the toes are. There isn't much of a distinction between a big toe and the rest of the toes. Where you look at the Patterson tracks, and there's a clear difference between the big toe and the rest of the toes. I would say it's more similar to the Washington tracks, but there's a slight variation, but I would say it's probably closer to those prints.
Yeah. So again, it begs the question, and I'm just really curious. I would love to see the creature that made that one and compare it to a type 1 Sasquatch.
It would be interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you, in my mind, it makes me think of maybe a more primitive Sasquatch.
Well, maybe not necessarily primitive, but different. Maybe they had developed different usages for their feet, so their feet developed different ways for different functions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And some of these are they're very big differences. And some people would say, oh, well, this one's fake and that one's real. How do you know?
Right.
The only person who claimed faking tracks in that area was Ray Wallace. And when you look at Ray Wallace's feet, they look nothing like all the other casts that were made during the decade that was going on. So to me, that kind of rules that out. But when
he just made wooden planks, basically. Yeah, stamps.
I mean, yeah, and especially, with the, I was thinking about feet movement, and there was a term I found that I was interested in utilizing, but I can't think of it at the moment. But when we were talking about them walking, and it has to do with, measuring the distance between tracks and things like that. Where people always call it stride, there's actually a different term for that, the spacing between a left and a right foot, for example. I'll have to find this so we can post that on the website, because it's important to know those distinctions, because you can get the wrong ideas. Typically that spacing between a left and a right foot, let's say, a lot of times it's between 50 and 60 inches, which is not something you're going to do with wooden feet strapped to your foot.
No, you're not.
So when they were finding tracks down there in those days, they would find these long spaces. And doggone it, I wish I could remember what that was off the top of my head, but it's not that important right now.
Well, you had the step and the stride. Briefly, what is the difference between those two?
Well, step is the measurement between two consecutive tracks. In other words, between a left and a right foot. That's the step. The stride is one arc swing of one leg. In other words, it's a measurement between one right foot and the next consecutive right foot impression, or left and left. That's stride. So people always say, they measure they get this 50 or 60 inch spacing between a left foot, which is actually step measurement, and they call it stride when that's not stride.
Okay, yeah, and that's very important.
It is very much so.
And so the stride, and again, just for anybody that's interested, when you're doing the measurement, it doesn't matter if you're using heel to heel. Just make sure you're not doing heel to toe when you're doing the measurement for step or stride.
Yeah, it's either heel to heel or toe to toe.
Yeah, don't mix the two up. And again, I'm going to go back to Eric Shipton's trackway, the photograph that he took. If you look at it, what I find interesting is in a line. All the footprints are in a line. You don't get, if it was a bear, like some people claim, you're going to have the left and the right foot spaced apart, but you don't have that. You have a direct register, a straight line through the snow.
Yeah, exactly. Which is something, yet again, that's different. Actually, I was just looking at something in Human Tracks, and Human Tracks, they actually measure also not just step and stride, but the distance between, let's say, a left and right foot, and they call that stance width. And what you see in the Sasquatch isn't that at all. That doesn't even exist because the tracks are in a straight line, so they're not really, they're not walking like a human at all.
Right, exactly. And that's what I was noticing. I don't think that was known back in 1952. So when Eric Shipton took that photograph, in my mind, that was just another strong indication of authenticity. This was a Yeti.
Yeah, exactly. I've got some, there's some diagrams I'll send that we can post on the website. We're talking about these things with feet, so it's very important.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's not Notes from the, is it Notes from the Field or another book that you have that goes into detail how to measure this and the description?
I want to say it's Notes from the Field. It could be In Search of the Unknown, but I think it's Notes from the Field.
Okay.
But it's also in Bigfoot Fieldwork 101.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was thinking. I was Bigfoot Fieldwork 101.
Actually, I think that's the book it's in. I got 8 of them in print, so sometimes I don't remember what's in which one. So
Right?
I put it out there, and there it is, if you want to know by the book.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, did we have any other questions or comments that we might address from listeners? Or
I think that's all we have for now. I don't have any more on my end, so I think that's it. So
we've got I think we have a couple people trying out for reading the stories that Jim used to do for us. So for the time being, folks, we're still using some of Jim's stories, but we will have some changes coming up. And we are constantly making changes to the show. With this one, of course, you can tell that there was a new intro for the show and bridge music. So let us know what you think about those. We would love to hear the comments.
Yeah, and again, kudos to Adam, our Hollywood guy. Much appreciated. Very nice.
Oh, and of course the newsletter, we're going to add another dimension to that. So again, Adam has got his hands involved in that. So Adam, we appreciate you, buddy. Everything you do for us is much, much appreciated. And folks, you'll like that. And if you want the newsletter, you can get it on my website, williamjevning.com. And we're going to have that on Creek Devil pretty soon, aren't we, Tom?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes, Creek Devil it'll be the same newsletter. So you can pick it up at either williamjevning.com or creekdevil.com.
And if you have things you'd like to contribute to the newsletter, stories, or what have you, or even comments, send those to. You want to send them to Creek Devil, Tom?
Yeah, the easiest way to reach us with any kind of a question or a comment or anything is you can email us questions at creekdevil.com.
All right, well, I think that'll do it for this segment. Folks, stay tuned for the third segment, and we will be right back.
Welcome. This reading is being brought to you by William Jevning and is being narrated by me, Jim Sower. On our last broadcast, I believe I read to you from The Abominable Snowman by Ivan T. Sanderson, and I read to you from the dedication and the foreword. Today I will begin reading to you from Chapter 1 about The Abominable Snowman by Ivan T. Sanderson, Legend Come to Life, about subhumans on 5 continents from the early Ice Age until today. Chapter 1. A certain unpleasantness. Upon the detection of an unpleasant odor, most people move off, while everybody wishes that it would go away. Nobody wants it around, yet it is seldom that anybody tries to determine its origin. In 1887, a major in the Medical Corps of the British Indian Army, Lawrence Austin Waddell, LLD, CB, CIE, FLS, FAI, in other words, Doctor of Laws, Commander of the ship Bath, Commander of the Indian Empire, Fellow of the Linnaean Society, Fellow of the Anthropological Institute, was meandering about in the eastern Himalayas doing what that rather remarkable breed of men were wont to do, that is, a bit of shooting, some subdued exploring, and a certain amount of politicking. Like many others of his ilk, he wrote a somewhat uninspired and uninspiring book about it, uninspiringly named Among the Himalayas. The major was a normal sort of chappie, and a sportsman, but his hunting was not of the feverish 91-gun-in-closet variety of today. Quite the contrary. He would take a few birds of the types that he considered to be legitimate game for his pot, or to keep his eye in for grouse shoots on his next home leave in Scotland. And he banged away at Tygarr, Tygarr, whenever the local natives could rustle one up. But he was not scrambling about the Himalayas primarily for what we nowadays call sport. He was just puttering, that lost 19th century British art, because he had some time off, and official sanction to make use of it as he would. Despite the limited intelligence attributed to 19th century British Indian Army colonels, they were really a most remarkable breed, almost a mutation, for from some hidden depths of their public school educations and the remoter recesses of their ancient family traditions, they dredged up a wealth of wisdom, and they often developed an extraordinarily keen interest in the world about them wherever they happened to land. Most of them were sort of mild philosophers. Many turned out to be brilliant linguists and great scholars, and they were often both leaders of men and students of animal life. They have been grossly maligned by almost everybody, laughed at as super blimps, and neglected as historians. But if you will just read their maunderings carefully, you will garner therefrom a trove of both literary and factual gems. Take this Major Waddell, for instance. While pounding over one of the unpleasanter bits of Sikkim in vile weather, he came upon a set of tracks made by some creature walking on 2 legs and bare feet, he says, went on and on over the freezing snow, not only taking the line of least resistance at every turn, but marking out a course in conformity with the easiest gradients that brought whoops of admiration even from the Major's mountain-born porters. He remarks almost casually upon this remarkable achievement and wonders vaguely not what manner of man, but what sort of creature could have made them, and why it should have decided to cross this awful pass in the first place. The Major did not realize when he penned his thought just what he was starting, though starting is perhaps not the exact word to describe his remarks, for what he recorded was already ancient history when Columbus sailed for the West Indies. It just so happens that, as far as popular recognition is concerned, his was one of the earliest mentions to appear in print in the English language, in what may be called modern times, of what has latterly become known as the Abominable Snowman. At that time, nobody in what we now call the Western world paid the slightest attention to this extraordinary report, at least as far as we know. It just went into the record as a statement, for one could hardly, in that day and age, call any pronouncement on the part of anybody with such notable honors a lie, or even a traveler's tale. It was therefore assumed that some religious chap must have preceded the gallant major over that particular route, and somehow managed not to die of frostbite, sunblindness, or starvation, and it was remarked that he had done a dashed good job of negotiating the pass. There the matter rested. Major Waddell's book was one of the many written about the end of the last century, when the Western world was complacently sure that it knew more or less everything about all countries, with the possible exceptions of Tibet and the holy city of Mecca, which it was then considered were rather unsporting in that they did not welcome civilized Englishmen. All sorts of sporting gentry went wandering about the fringes of the empire with rod and gun, and later wrote about their experiences. Their effusions were read by both the previous and the upcoming generations of colonial pioneers, but by few others. What they said was not taken too seriously by the general non-empire-building public. However, many of these gentry also submitted official reports on certain less publicized aspects of their activities to their superiors, and these were taken very seriously. Unfortunately, the great body of such reports are not published, and many of them are either lost in some archive or truly lost forever. There are others that are still top secret and unavailable, so that their very existence is often conjectural. Yet every now and then one stumbles upon such a report that is extremely tantalizing. Tracking down the original is a frightful chore, and one of the most time-consuming and frustrating experiences. One is balked at every turn, but not, I would stress, by any deliberate or organized defense on the part of authority. Official archives are preserved for the benefit of all, and are open to inspection by all, and even the topmost secrets are in time released as mere historical dejecta. The trouble is simply that the original reporters, and more so those reported to, did not lay any store by or place any specific value on esoterica, or anything other than the primary matter at hand, which was often of a diplomatic or political nature, so that the items that interest us most were never indexed or catalogued. You just have to plow through mountains of material quite extraneous to your particular quarry and hope to stumble upon casual asides that are pertinent to it. But one does occasionally so stumble. Now, I should state, without further ado, and quite frankly, that I am prejudiced in favor of official as opposed to any other form of reports, and for the following reasons. In this country we do not, let's face it, have much respect for the law, or its potential, unless we have recourse to it, or it requires our submission. Until we have been on a witness stand, almost all of us believe that perjury, which is simply a legal term for lying in the law's presence, should be the easiest thing in the world, but even those of us who say that laws are made only to be broken soon found that they are not. Few think twice about telling a fish story in the corner bar, but there are very few, even congenital idiots, who won't think before telling it in a court of law. When, therefore, somebody voluntarily makes an official statement, when there is no profit motive involved, I have always felt it reasonable to assume that it is quite likely true. The British happen to have a particular respect for their law and British officialdom, despite what has been said about its colonial policies, has always been remarkably altruistic. British consuls and other officials just did not report a lot of rubbish to their service headquarters. Even paper was scarce in minor British outposts, and the field officers did not clutter up essential reports with bizarre trivia unless they considered them to be of a real import. We approach, therefore, the following official report with a certain quota of awe. It appears that in 1902, British Indian officialdom was concerned with the stringing of the first telegraph line from Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, to Kalimpong, Darjeeling, in Bengal province of India, just south of the Sikkim border. The job entailed, first, going into Tibet, and then stringing the cable out. When the crew reached a pass named Chumbathang, near a place called Jelapla, in the Tibetan-Sikkim border, an incident occurred that prompted an official report. A dozen workers failed to return to camp one evening, and a military posse was sent next day to search for them at the scene of their operations. No trace of the missing men was found, but the soldiers, during their wide search for them, found a remarkable creature asleep under a rock ledge, or so the report goes. The soldiers were Indians, not Gurkhas or mountain folk, and this is of significance because had they been, they would doubtless have acted differently. The Indians had no qualms about shooting this creature to death immediately. It proved to be human rather than animal in form, though covered with thick, hairy fur. Up to this point, the report is official. Then it becomes unofficial, but for one minor aside to the effect that a full report, together with the beast, was shipped to the senior British political officer, then resident in Sikkim, who is correctly named as one Sir Charles Bell. The unofficial sequence I take from an extraordinary book only recently published by Mr. John Keel entitled Jadoo. This is the more startling in that it even mentions an incident apparently lost and certainly forgotten over half a century before, yet states that the information therein given was obtained first-hand. The author states that he met in 1957 in Darjeeling a retired Indian soldier named Bahadur Chetri, who claimed that he was among the party that killed this creature and that he personally examined it. He is also alleged to have said that it was about 10 feet tall, covered with hair but for a naked face, and that it had long yellow fangs. Further, Mr. Keel says that Bahadur Chetri told him that the carcass had been packed in ice and shipped to this same Sir Charles Bell, but that he did not hear anything further from it. Nor, apparently, did Mr. Keel, and nor have I, though I have spent a lot more time and energy than the item might seem to warrant in a fruitless endeavor to trace further reports, official or otherwise. This is the more aggravating since it is the earliest report that I have found on the actual, or even the alleged, capture of any form of what we shall call henceforth an ABSM, i.e. the Abominable Snowman, by what we must also, for lack of any established overall name, call the Western world in the Oriental region. Nonetheless, it is by no means the only such report, nor actually the earliest on record, for, as we shall presently see, it was preceded in 2, if not 3 other continents by just as definite statements, and in some cases official ones at that. And this brings up another point that I should endeavor to clear up forthwith. I should have preferred to start this story where all stories should begin, which is to say, at the beginning. However, despite a chronology that I have compiled over the years, such a procedure would be open to at least 2 serious defects. First, it is almost daily, and now with increasing tempo, being added to almost all along the line, which its origins are regressing even farther into the recorded past. Second, it would be extraordinarily dry and over-formal in the eyes of any but extreme specialists. I have felt, therefore, that the history of this whole ABSM business will be much better understood if it is unfolded upon the chronology of its discovery and progress, a sort of history of a history, that is, further, herein recorded deliberately from what we called above the Western point of view, in that it is a chronological record of how the matter was brought to the attention of the Western world. In this, it will soon be seen that a greater part of the discoveries made have come to light in reverse. For instance, it has only been within most recent years that the earliest accounts have come to light, and the further research workers probe into the whole matter, the farther back the origins of the whole ABSM affair recede, while the wider does their distribution become both in fact and in report. Thus, in treating of the history of this matter, we must bear in mind that what appear to us to be discoveries are more nearly revelations, because the majority of the world, which is, of course, non-Western, has, to some degree or another, known all about this business for centuries, while we have remained completely oblivious of and to it. For these reasons, I divide our chronology into 5 stages and call these as follows. 1. The ancient period prior to the 15th century expansion of Europe. 2. The Dark Ages, from 1500 to 1880. 3. That of the explorers, from about 1880 to 1920. That of the mountaineers, 1920 to 1950. And 5. That of the searchers, from 1950 to the present day. All of this, however, applies primarily and most essentially to the Himalayan area of the Oriental region where this business was primarily unfolded for us. The same periods, of course, exist in time elsewhere, such as North America, but they cannot be founded on the same criteria or named after the same classes of entrepreneurs. Behind this chronology, and everywhere, lies an immense period of what I call native knowledge. This trails off in the dim mists of the extreme past and into folklore and myth, an area which is only just now being taken into account as serious history rather than mere make-believe. Thus, in other parts of the world, our story has often jumped straight out of the native period into that of scientific study. While ABSMs were not only reported but also reported upon, and even officially in other parts of the world, vide Canada, long before the travels of Major Waddell, and while specimens, as it now turns out, are alleged to have been captured or killed long before that, we of the West recognize that some of these happenings, or alleged happenings, only very recently happened. Also, it now transpires detailed and more properly critical information on the subject was even being published in Eastern Eurasia centuries ago. For instance, in Tibet, China, Mongolia, and Manchuria. And some reflections of this had filtered through to Europe as early as Renaissance times, as it exemplified in certain curious statements in the works of Marco Polo. Millions of people were talking all this as a matter of course, but the whole thing being completely foreign to European conditions or even thought, it made no impression upon what we now call the Western world until our 4th period, namely of the mountaineers. Just how foreign it was prior to that period is clearly demonstrated by the reception, or lack of it, given to a report published in a scientific journal, Proceedings of the Zoological Society of London, in the year 1915, and the brief comments upon it made at the time. The report was read before the Society by a very well-known botanist and scientific explorer named Henry J. Elwes, and consisted of portions of a letter received by that gentleman from a forestry officer by the name of J.R.O. Gent, who was stationed in Darjeeling. This read as follows. I have discovered the existence of another animal, but cannot make out what it is. A big monkey, or ape, perhaps, if there were any apes in India. It is a beast of very high elevations and only goes down to Falut in the cold weather. It is covered with longish hair, face also hairy, the ordinary yellowish-brown color of the Bengal monkey, stands about 4 feet high, and goes about on the ground chiefly, though I think it can also climb. The peculiar feature is that its tracks are about 18 inches or 2 feet long, and toes point in the opposite direction to that in which the animal is moving. The breadth of the track is about 6 inches. I take it he walks on his knees and shins instead of on the sole of his foot. He is known as the Jungli Admi, or Sogpa. One was worrying a lot of coolies working in the forest below Falut in December. They were very frightened and would not go into work. I set off as soon as I could to try to bag one of the beast. But before I arrived, the forester had been letting off a gun and frightened it away, so I saw nothing. An old chowkidar of Falut told me that he had frequently seen them in the snow there, and confirmed the description of the tracks. It is a thing that practically no Englishman has ever heard of, but all the natives of the higher villages know about it. All I can say is that it is not the Nepal langur, but I've impressed upon people up there that I want information the next time one is about. This report, which would today probably cause quite a stir in certain circles, though for various and quite opposed reasons, seems hardly even to have been commented upon. It would probably have been dismissed altogether, and most likely not published in the proceedings, had it not been read by such a person as Elwes. As it was, the general impression left was that perhaps a new species of monkey had been found, and some local folklore embellished. But, unexpectedly, Henry Elwes then saw fit to make a statement of his own to the effect that in 1906 he had himself seen the same or a similar creature in another part of the Himalayas. Most aggravatingly, he either did not give further details, or they were not recorded at the time, and after he died his notes were lost, while no mention of the incident was to be found in any of his published writings. Zoologists were apparently quite impressed at the time because of the standing of Elwes, but the matter never got further than the closed confines of professional zoology. It was, moreover, not until 1920 that the English-speaking public, outside of the limited audience earlier served by the writings of the travelers of the Orient, was in any way made aware of this whole business. And, as is so often the case, it was even then more by accident than by design. This part of our story is most intriguing as well as being a sort of turning point in Western thinking, and not only upon this, but upon many other matters. But before telling you the details of this little comedy, I just want to diverge a moment to impress upon you once again the fact that when they took place, while a revelation, was more particularly so to the Anglo-Saxon world. A decade before, 1907, a certain then young zoologist named Vladimir A. Koklov started an extended survey of similar matters throughout Central Eurasia and submitted a long report on it to the Imperial Academy of Sciences in Russia. Netherlands authorities had been pestered with annoying, to officialdom, reports of a like nature emanating from Sumatra. The French had undergone the same in Indochina, and the Brazilians in their country, while even in British Columbia both the courts and the Crown itself had long been bothered by citizens seeking to make depositions on closely related matters. Thus, in retrospect, the happenings of 1920 lose a great deal of their import, if not their impact. In that year, an incident occurred that was impressive enough, but which might have been either wholly or temporarily buried, had it not been for a concatenation of almost piffling mistakes. In fact, without these mistakes, it is almost certain that the whole matter would have remained in obscurity, and might even now be considered in an entirely different light or in the status of such other mysteries as that of sea monsters. This was a telegram sent by Lieutenant Colonel, now Sir, C.K. Howard Barry, who was on a reconnaissance expedition to Mount St. Everest region. The expedition was approaching the northern face of Everest, that is to say from the Tibetan side, and when at about 17,000 feet up on the Lapgala Pass, saw and watched, through binoculars, a number of dark forms moving about on a snowfield far above. It took them some time and considerable effort to reach the snowfield where these creatures had been, but when they did, so they found large numbers of huge footprints, which Colonel Howard Barry later stated were about 3 times those of normal humans, but which he nonetheless also said he thought had been made by a very large, stray, gray wolf. The extraordinarily illogical phrasing of this statement will be discussed later on, but it should be noted here that a large party of people had seen several creatures moving about, not just a wolf, and that it is hard to see how the colonel could determine its color from its tracks. However, despite these expressions, the Sherpa porters on the expedition disagreed with them most firmly and stated that the tracks were made by a creature of human form to which they gave the name Mito Kangmi. Colonel Howard Barry appears to have been intrigued by this scrap of what he seems to have regarded as local folklore, but like all who have had contact with them, he had such respect for the Sherpas that he included the incident in a report that he sent to Kathmandu, capital of Nepal, to be telegraphed on to his representatives in India. And this is where the strange mistakes began. It appears that Colonel Howard Barry, in noting the name given by the Sherpas, either mistransliterated or miswrote it, he also failed to realize that he was dealing with one of several kinds of creatures known to the Sherpas, and that they, on this account, apparently both in an endeavor to emphasize this and for the sake of clarity, used as a generic term for all of them the name Kangmi, which is a word foreign to their language. This is a Tibetan colloquialism in some areas, and is itself partly foreign in origin even there, in that Kang is apparently of Chinese origin, while Mi is a form of Nepalese meh. The combination thus meant snow creature. His meto would better have been written me-te, the name of which we shall hear much, and which turns out to mean the meh, or man-sized te, or wild creature. However, the Indian telegraph then got it in the act, and either he dispatched this word as, or it was transcribed in India as mech. The recipients in India were unfamiliar with any of the languages or the dialects of the area, but they were impressed by the fact that Howard Barry had thought whatever it might be important enough to cable the report. So they appealed to a sort of fount of universal wisdom for help. This was a remarkable gentleman named Mr. Henry Newman, who has for years written a most fascinating column in the Calcutta Statesman on almost every conceivable subject, and who has the most incredible fund of information at his fingertips. This gentleman, however, did not really know the local languages or dialects of the eastern Tibet or Nepal either, but this did not deter him from giving an immediate translation of this mech Kangmi, which he stated categorically was Tibetan for an abominable snowman. The result was like the explosion of an atom bomb. Nobody, and notably the press, could possibly pass up any such delicious term. They seized upon it with the utmost avidity, and bestowed upon it enormous mileage, but almost without anything concrete to report. The British press gulped this up, and the public was delighted. Then there came a lull in the storm. During this time, it now transpires, a number of eager persons started a fairly systematic search for previous reports on these abominable creatures, and they came up with sufficient to convince their editors that the story was not just a flash in pan, but a full-fledged mystery that had actually been going on for years. Thus, the birth of the Abominable Snowman, per se, may be precisely dated as of 1920. And once it was launched, it gathered momentum. As we shall see later when we come to examine the actual reports from the eastern Himalaya region, almost everybody who went there, and notably the mountaineers, reported either seeing snowmen, their tracks, or hearing them, finding cairns and other objects moved by them, or relating information second-hand that they had gleaned from the native population. The business reached a crescendo in 1939, with the publication of several quite long accounts in books by well-known and much respected explorers such as Ronald Kaulbach. Then came World War II, and the matter faded into limbo. But it did not by any means stop. No sooner was the war over than the onslaught on Mount Everest was resumed, and along with this came a new approach to the ABSM affair. Everybody appears to have felt it incumbent to at least mention the matter, even if he could not contribute anything new or material to the story. Yet there were very few who did not have something concrete to offer, and indeed I am unable to name one who didn't. What is more, prior to World War II, this was an almost exclusively British affair, though there was a book on the first American Karakoram expedition, entitled 5 Miles High, that was most pertinent. It has now become international as a result not only of expeditions going to the area from many nations and of multinational composition, but also because of reports that came to light, but which were originally made during the war. Also, for the first time, reports by what may be called native foreigners began to appear. The whole subject of natives is a sorry one, and it is rather muddling to the Americans because, to them, it has several meanings, none of which is exactly synonymous with the term as developed and understood among the British. It was the declaration of independence by a number of Asiatic nations that brought confusion, in that while these peoples were manifestly native to their own countries, they suddenly became no longer natives in the precise British sense, so that what they said had to be accepted and assessed in an entirely new light. Whereas, while anything stated by such people prior to the war could be passed off as a mere native tale, or a story by some benighted native, it had now to be treated with respect as a statement by a responsible citizen. What is more, an Indian traveling through Nepal or Tibet also became just as much a foreigner as any Britisher, and in some cases actually more so, because there were places where more Britishers had been living longer than the Indians. This proved extremely awkward to the British at first, and it took about a decade, even for their phlegmatic genius, for compromise, along with a fairly genuine common decency and belief in good manners, to gain the upper hand. Despite the international scramble, it was again the British who attracted world attention to the matter of ABSMs, and it was still their mountaineers who did this. The most notable was Mr. Eric Shipton, who on still another reconnaissance of the Everest block came upon a long set of tracks, not by any means for the first time in his life, and after following them for some distance, noting they were definitely bipedal but negotiated almost impossible obstacles that would be hard for even an experienced mountaineer to do, took a series of clear photographs of them. While they were published in the much-respected Illustrated London News, not a publication given to elaboration, irresponsible reportage, or the mounting of international jokes, this time everybody had to take the matter seriously, and they did, but in a variety of ways. The public, as is its pragmatic wont, took to it at its face value. The press literally howled. The explorers cheered a bit, but the scientists flew into a positive tantrum and altogether undignified performance, the effects of which have not yet worn off and will not do so for many years. This was in 1951, and it marked the next turning point in the history of ABS-emery. Up till then, the matter had been primarily a Western, and notably a British, prerequisite. It had also been a child of the popular press, with a sort of minor Cold War going on between the mountaineers and the zoologists. Now, however, a new agency entered the picture, a polyglot assortment of people of various bents that can only be termed the searchers. Since the turn of the century, there had continued to be outright explorers as well as putterers and sportsmen in the field, and not a few of those continued to stumble upon ABSMs, or tracks, and other evidence of their passing. None of these, however, had any prior interest in the matter, and, like the mountaineers, had been in the Himalayas primarily for other purposes. On the other hand, the whole affair was, until Eric Shipton published his photographs, really nothing more than a news gimmick, though the press had had to tread warily with the reporters made by prominent persons, and especially the mountaineers engaged in the attack on Everest, which had official backing. The scientific world had not been quite so circumspect. At the outside, it denounced the whole thing as, first, a fraud, and then a case of mistaken identity, and it stuck to this story. And it still, in large part, sticks to it today, even to the extent of deliberately ridiculing such men as Shipton and Kaulbach. But after their completely unsuccessful attempt to set Shipton's 1951 findings at naught, which backfired with considerable public impact, a sort of revolution began within the ranks of science. Some top-notch scientists, not just technicians and self-appointed experts who happened to be employed by scientific organizations, started to investigate the whole matter upon truly scientific principles. What is more, these scientists were primarily anthropologists, as opposed to zoologists, and this was of the utmost significance, for the latter had permanently closed the door on the whole question when they could not prove that it was a hoax, stating flatly that all ABSM tracks were made either by bears or monkeys. Also, there were anthropological expeditions actually going into the field, and these too began to report discoveries similar to those of the mountaineers. Notable among the field workers were Dr. Weiss Dunant of a Swiss expedition, Professor von Futter-Heimendorf of the School of Oriental and African Studies, and in particular Professor René von Nebesky-Wojtkowicz. Among those not engaged in fieldwork were Dr. C.W. Osman Hill of the Zoological Society of London in England, Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans, Belgian zoologist in Paris, and latterly a whole group of Russian scientists led by Professor B.F. Porzhniev. It was the press, however, that was in the end first in the field with an expedition aimed primarily at the ABSMs. This was organized by the Daily Mail of London and went to the Himalayas in 1954. It was a curious outfit, and it was not very successful, but it initiated a new, and to date the last, phase in the history of this mystery. It was led by a reporter, Ralph Izard, and had among its members a professional zoologist, Dr. Biswas of Calcutta, and also a man named W.M. Gerald Russell, whose experience was of great significance, though nobody seems to have realized it at the time. However, it was once again directed by mountaineers. The significance of this escaped everybody then, and to a very great extent still does. The universal impression had been gained over the years that the abominable, as then supposed, snowman, whatever it might be, was a denizen of the snowfields, and therefore inhabited the uppermost slopes of the Himalayas. As a result, Its pursuit was looked upon primarily as a mountaineering job and was therefore given to the professionals and the experts in that field of sport. The idea of including a scientist, and especially a zoologist, had never occurred to anybody previously. The idea of including a man with the particular skills and experience, as well as training, of Gerald Russell was not even yet, it seems, dawned upon anybody. Russell alone, among the whole army of investigators, is really the only man qualified to tackle the problem, for he is a professional collector, which is something absolutely different from either hunters or sportsmen on the one hand, or research scientists on the other. Then again, no ABSM is a denizen of any snowfield, naturally, and as should be obvious to any sane person on a moment's consideration, for in such places there is nothing to eat. All turn out to inhabit dense mountain forests. Thus, just about the last person suited to search for them are mountaineers, who have a positive passion for climbing mountains above all else, while sportsmen and hunters are little better for other and even more obvious reasons. This is a somewhat sensitive question, but one of first importance. The techniques developed over the ages for hunting are basically aggressive, be they noisy as in beating, or silent as in stalking. Further, the dog, which is not only a domestic but actually an artificial animal, has been extensively used in hunting. These methods obtain the quickest results in the largest amounts of what is specifically desired. Collecting, on the other hand, should best be almost entirely passive. Silence is one of its features in certain of its aspects, but almost as much as noise is permissible as in hunting in certain circumstances. To obtain animals not normally hunted, the less ground covered the better, but the longer the collector must sit and wait for the animals to become used to his presence. The noises he makes, and the effluva he gives off in the normal course of living, as many artificial things as possible must be eliminated, and most notably dogs, metal, especially metal cleaned with mineral oils, and such like that are not indigenous to the wild. Given time, any wild creature, however timid, will come to investigate the collector, whereas it will fly before the hunter long before it is detected. Even zoologists, unless they have had extensive collecting experience in the field, are little better, for they, poor souls, are hustled about by everybody else into and out of the least likely areas for proper investigation, and are in any case supplied in advance with a sort of book of rules that goes far to negotiating the search for anything that is not already known. The Daily Mail expedition did, nonetheless, include among its ranks, and deliberately, a very experienced zoologist with field experience in the form of Dr. Biswas, and, quite fortuitously, in the person of Gerald Russell, the first and only man on any ABSM expedition trained to tackle such a collecting problem. It also accomplished something else, in that it publicized the whole matter and served notice on everybody that the press was no longer overawed by what they had termed scientific opinion, but from then on took the affair for granted as having graduated from the category of the silly season filler. In fact, it pointed the way to some serious endeavor designed to try to solve the mystery. This challenge was taken up by quite a new type of operator. The Daily Mail expedition returned in 1955, and in that same year an Argentine mountaineering expedition and another British party of Royal Air Force alpinists reported having encountered tracks and other evidence of ABSMs. The following year, the young man, John Keel, already mentioned, made his trip through the country and, as stated in his book published in 1958, tracked and sighted an ABSM. At the same time, the Russians were conducting investigations and getting ready to make a concerted attack upon the problem. There were also quite a number of others in the field, while the few serious students at home began to bring to light all manner of related items from the past. The busiest of these scientific sleuths, and the most open-minded and best informed, was the zoologist Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans, who had for long specialized in the collection and examination of evidence for the existence of any creatures as yet unknown to and unidentified by zoologists. It was he, moreover, who first brought the findings of the Hollanders in East Indies, the French, and Indochina, and to a very considerable extent that of the South American explorers, to light. The American expedition of these findings by Heuvelmans, On the Track of Unknown Animals, was published by Hill and Wang of New York in 1958. However, the most significant personality to enter the field was the prominent Texan Mr. Thomas B. Slick. Tom Slick, as he is known to everybody and all over the world, is a most remarkable man. To Americans he is probably best known because of the airline that carries his name, which is itself a natural advertisement with amusing connotations in the English language. Then, in the world of commerce, as he is widely known for his position in the mysterious world of oil and the very down-to-earth world of beef, but his international reputation is based on his extraordinary efforts in the cause of world peace. Tom Slick has done many other things, and is not only a patron of, but a driving force in many purely scientific endeavors. He established the second-largest privately owned research unit in the world, in the form of the Southwest Research Institute near his hometown of San Antonio, and adjacent to his other large organization for educational promotion. I am often asked to describe this man, and my response is invariably the same, namely to say simply that, for all his activities and the vastness of his outlook and effort, he is less like the popular conception of a Texan than anybody I have ever met. Tom Slick does things, and very fortunately he became intrigued with the business of ABSMs. Despite ridicule, especially among many of those closest to him, he set to work upon it with the determination that he, almost alone in the Western world it seems, was capable of and willing to apply. And, being a bulldog, he has kept quietly at it ever since. I speak of Tom Slick at length because it is he, and he almost alone, who has by his quiet persuasion heaved this whole irksome business out of a sort of 10-ring international circus into the realm of a serious scientific endeavor, while he has also stimulated others in England, France, Italy, India, and elsewhere, who are working on the problem, by means of personal contacts, and by the exercise of sympathetic encouragement. Finally, he did one more thing. This was to break out of the confined limits of the Himalayan area and the Oriental region, and direct attention at proper efforts to other parts of the world, such as California, which are proving to be every bit as important in regards to ABSMs, if not much more significant than even the uplands of Eurasia. He began his own personal investigations by a trip to the Himalayan region in 1957. In 1957, Tom Slick, together with A.C. Johnson, mounted the first full-fledged expedition to the Himalayas for the specific and sole purpose of investigating ABSMs. This saw the extremely fortuitous bringing together of Gerald Russell and the brothers Peter and Brian Byrne, and was the happiest event that had happened until then, and still has been until the time of this writing, happened to ABSMery. For the first time in history, the leadership was not given to mountaineers or hunters, but to persons with collecting experience who believed that the quarry was real, was multiple in form, and that in all its forms it lived in the forests as opposed to the upper snowfields. As a result, this expedition came closer to obtaining concrete results than any other before or since, and produced more straight evidence of the existence of such creatures than all other expeditions put together. For details, wait until we get to Chapter 12. In the same year, however, the Soviet Academy of Sciences had established a special commission to coordinate the findings for several groups who had been working on the problem in countries within the Soviet sphere. These workers had brought to light the astonishing reports of Koklov made to the Academy in 1914, but which had been shelved. They had before them the current report of Dr. Pronin, a hydrologist of Leningrad University, who alleged he had seen an ABSM in the Pamirs, and that they had a wealth of material from the Mongolian People's Republic and a lot from China. And they had decided to mount proper scientific expeditions to investigate. These were 4 in number, and were put into the field in 1958, one to the Caucasus, where a creature named the Wind Man had been rumored for centuries, one to the north face of the Everest Block, one to the Mongolian region, and one to the Pamirs, which, for certain odd reasons, they considered to be the breeding ground of the ABSMs. Meantime, they started the publication of their overall findings in the form of booklets, and concurrently with this, a series of studies on fossil men, and particularly the Neanderthals. Also, a wealth of previously unpublished material, some historical and some current, appeared in certain Russian magazines, notably Technika Molodoyozy. These Soviet activities shed an entirely new light on the whole business, and also put it on such an altogether higher plane that Western scientific circles were obliged to change their attitude toward the matter quite drastically. No longer could they simply avoid the issue by saying that it had been explained, or that its protagonists were merely a bunch of amateur enthusiasts pursuing a fantasy. At the same time, a certain nervous irritation was to be detected in their pronouncements, because the press just then began harping on the case of the coelacanth fish discovered off the southeast coast of South Africa. This had at first been called a hoax, but had finally had to be accepted as living proof of the fact that not everything about the life of the planet is known. Obviously, creatures confidently thought to have been decently extinct for tens of millions of years can still be around. Further, it was the Russians who first stressed, though perhaps more by inference, something that those scientists in the West who had taken the matter seriously had been harping on for some time. This was that the whole problem is an anthropological rather than a zoological matter. In other words, all the Sino-Soviet evidence pointed to ABSMs being primitive hominoids, i.e., men, rather than pongids, i.e., apes, or other non-human creatures, thus linking them with known fossil forms such as Gigantopithecus, the Pithecanthropines, and especially the Neanderthalers. And in so doing, they also emphasize another point, that the whole now very serious but totally ignored fact that there is not just one creature called the Abominable Snowman, but a whole raft of creatures distributed almost all over the world, of very considerable variety, and of as many as 3 distinct types in the Tibetan Himalayan area alone. This suggestion was, of course, not merely obnoxious, but positively horrific to the orthodox scientists, who were still vehemently denying even the possibility of the existence of even one such entity. Then the final bombshell landed. At this point in my narrative, I must confess to a considerable embarrassment, since I must speak in the first person, and I do this with much diffidence. In 1958, I received a number of reports of an ABSM in California. At first, this sounded quite balmy, even to us, and we are used to the most outrageous things, and got itself filed among what we call Forteana, which is to say that those damnable and inaccessible items of the categories collected by the late Charles Fort. However, it so happened that I was privileged to spend the year 1959 touring the North American continent, gathering material for a book on its geology, structure, vegetational cover, and wildlife. Before leaving, I had a research specialist, Stanley I. Rowe, with whom I had long been associated, prepare for me from his files, from ours, and from other sources, the details of any and all oddities and enigmas reported from this continent by states and provinces. These I investigated as a news reporter, and as I went along, and when I came to Northern California, I fell into the most extraordinary state of affairs that I have ever encountered in my life. This was no idle rumor, but a full-fledged mystery and a straight-down-the-line, hard-boiled news story. This I tell in detail in Chapter 6, so suffice it to say here that I found there clear and most convincing evidence of the existence of a form of ABSM of most outstanding qualities. But worse was to follow, for prompted by this astonishing discovery, I went aside in British Columbia to investigate their long-renowned Sasquatch, only to find that it was just as definite and apparently identical to the Omas, or Bigfeet, of California. Subsequent research has, what is more, brought to light a mass of other reports of similar things from Quebec, the Canadian Northwest Territories, the Yukon, the Idaho Rockies, Washington, and Oregon. This brings us up to the date of writing, except to note that a large Japanese expedition went in 1959 to 60 to the Himalayas specifically to search for the ABSMs. While there were other expeditions in that area, in Sumatra and in California, fitted out for the purpose. Finally, later this year, 1960, Sir Edmund Hillary, backed by American sponsors and with Marlin Perkins, director of the Lincoln Park Zoo of Chicago, accompanying him as zoological expert, conducted an expedition to the eastern Himalayas with this pursuit as his second major objective. That is the end of Chapter 1. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned next week for the beginning of Chapter 2.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open.